across America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to be talking about raising gender-confident kids. And as you might imagine, we're going to be getting into this whole idea of transgenderism. This is a book that is so significant, if for no other reason than two of my favorite people to interview are the co-authors of this book. How in the world did that come about? So first of all, Dr. Kathy Koch is in studio with us. She is the founder of Celebrate Kids. We've had her on the program many times before. You've seen her speaking at CareNet and Summit Ministries, the Colson Center, and on and on and on. A matter of fact, featured in the Kirk Cameron movie called Connect, and has published 7 books with Moody. This one actually is with Summit Ministries. But Kathy, it is always great to see you face to face.
Well, it's good to see you face to face. Thank you so much for having both Jeff and myself on.
Usually we see each other at National Religious Broadcasters, but every once in a while you get to come over here and be with us. Dr. Jeff Myers, of course, again, no stranger to the program, president of Summit Ministries. You know him from a variety of different things, and including author of, I think it's now 19 books, Understanding the Faith, Understanding the Time, has his Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Denver, and a very good friend. And Dr. Jeff Myers, thank you for joining us as well by phone.
Kerby, great to be with you, and I'm sorry I can't be with the two of you there in the studio. I love your show.
Well, we love having you. And Kathy, let's first of all talk about how two of these very significant individuals came together, and it came from a video call. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's a fun conversation to have. I've been thinking about writing this book for a while, and Kerby, I didn't really want to write it, and you can probably understand that. It's a tough issue, lots of opinions and ideas about what is right and what is wrong, and I have a lot of friends on all sides of the coin, I guess. So I wasn't confident. We're a small ministry. I didn't know if I was really able to handle this thing. Well, unbeknownst to me, Dr. Jeff Myers from Summit was also thinking about the need for a book in this topic because he knew from the students that we teach at Summit that this was a real issue. But then he found out that I was thinking of writing it, and he called me and he goes, we shouldn't compete, which I really appreciate that.
Yes.
Let's cooperate, right? Yeah. We don't need to compete and do 2 books and then be watching and tracking the numbers. That's just insane. So he reached out and he said, hey, what would you think about doing this together? And I was thrilled because of his brilliance coupled with my experiences. And we feel like the Lord was good to us, and it was really a fun project, actually. And now we have, both Summit Ministries and Celebrate Kids promoting, and it's been really, really a joy.
And again, it pulls together both of your strengths. Of course, I have your 8 Great Smarts book here for those of you watching online. And of course, you are very good about talking about the particular needs that young people have. Mm-hmm. When you come to Jeff Myers, we'll hold up his book, Truth Changes Everything, which is a book that we thought so significant. We sent it to some of our major donors. We bought copies and sent them out to them. So, Jeff, of course, you bring theology and apologetics and worldview. Kathy brings all sorts of psychological issues. This was almost a marriage made in heaven, wasn't it?
I think so. And, the thing that Kathy and I have in common is we both love young adults, and we love working with them. We want to see them rise up as leaders. We want to see them live out their God-given design. We want to see them love Jesus and love other people. And so when we started to notice that there were rising levels of anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation, and that much of that was related to questions they had about their gender. How can I be sure that gender really matters? And maybe it doesn't really matter that I'm a boy or a girl. And those struggles got to the hearts of both of us. It's not the topic that we would have chosen, as Kathy said, but we've got to begin where the issue is. And Kerby, because you cover so many issues, more than any other show that I'm aware of, you realize that every cultural confusion is an opportunity. It gives us a chance to bring clarity from a biblical worldview. So rather than run from it, we engage it.
Well, again, I might just mention that our engineer actually is a graduate of the Summit Ministries. So, again, we have all sorts of individuals around us that have benefited from both of your books and resources and the rest. Kathy, just before we get into the meat of this, help us understand maybe the platform, the foundation for how to engage this, because it seems to me that early on we need to, of course, define some terms, but we also need to figure out what the posture for engagement is, don't we?
I love that. Yes, we believe that a posture of hope hope is essential. We can't be coming at this from a despair or an angry perspective. We believe compassion is totally appropriate. Frankly, Kerby, if I was young today, I wonder if I would have gotten sucked into this movement. It would be very easy, I think, if you're confused, that you could be, captured by this ideation, to use that word. A posture of truth, obviously. I think looking forward and giving kids, an idea that their purpose hasn't yet been discovered, so live longer and find out why you are the way you are, because your gender has something to do with that. And then when you put it all together, confidence would be the other one. Be confident in who you are, confident in God. Like, gender confidence is ultimately a confidence in God as a strategic, intentional creator. So when you put hope, compassion, truth, and confidence together, you get courage. And this is what we need. This is what parents need to say no to their kids. This is what young people need to be able to say no to the haters and to stand up for, the who they are.
Yes. Jeff, for just a minute, talk about the confusion that you run into, because I have had conversations with you both on the air and off the air about the fact that sometimes you have young people that go to Summit and they are there maybe because they are a little bit resistant. I've noticed some heel marks at the end of some of those doors. And so they already have some bad attitudes, or even if they grew up in a Christian home, for the first time they're away from home, they're starting to think about things, and you found a fairly significant amount of confusion on this issue, even among Christian young people, haven't you?
There's no question. Young adults today are growing up in a postmodern mindset that says that I am my own truth. I don't seek the truth. I speak my truth. Well, if you're the center of reality, then every confusion you have is your reality. And you have no actual grounding in the physical world or anything else. This sounds very strange to people who are older adults, because they say, well, obviously there's a biological reality of male and female, and that is correct. There are 6,500 cataloged biological differences between males and females when it comes to humans. But the question, the struggle for young adults today is really an identity struggle. Who am I as a person, and does it really matter that I am male or female? Maybe I've been born in the wrong body because I don't seem to fit the stereotypes of what my peers think is important. And so I don't think young adults, when they come to Summit, they're not dumb. They're deceived. Mm-hmm. They are not coming in as much resistant to the truth as just resistant to the idea that one more person is going to tell me what I need to do, and I'm trying to figure all of that out. So when they come to Summit, they feel loved, they feel connected to others. We give them the facts, but we also help them recognize God designed you this way on purpose. And as you discover that, even when it's uncomfortable, if you can just learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable for a little bit, yes, then you can grow in character, and the rest of your life will be different.
You are going to really appreciate this book. We have information about it. Of course, we have a link to both to Celebrate Kids and to Summit Ministries, and the book you can get paperback or Kindle. When we come back, though, we're going to spend some time. Obviously, we'll be talking with Kathy about some of those 5 core needs, some of the 8 great smarts. We're going to certainly be talking with Jeff about how worldview helps answer some of these questions, and really, how did we get to this particular situation in the first place? So let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Clay Shirky, writing in the Yale Alumni Magazine, reminds us of the benefits and limitations of chatbots. He begins with a thought experiment. Imagine you were sitting around a Thanksgiving table on 2022, and a guest asked the table when AI would get to 1 million users. Some might say 2 years away, others might say 10 years away. The answer is a week from Monday. OpenAI dropped ChatGPT 3.5 on the last day of November. It had 1 million users by December 5th. This illustrates how fast AI have become part of our lives. To use ChatGPT, all you need to do is talk. But he says it's almost impossible to resist treating software that talks as something that also thinks. And because it has sophisticated language skills, it is easy to see why users depend on it and tend to overestimate the range and depths of its skills. One good example is the statement, an AI can pass the LSAT. While that may be true, it is not true that an AI can be a lawyer. He asked one of his lawyer colleagues about the LSAT story. The lawyer replied, "I cannot convey to you how little my day is like answering a question on the LSAT." He says that if you see a factory making tires, you conclude that the worker's effort is to create tires. However, that is not true for a history class. If you conclude that the output is history papers and students are there to create papers, you have just misunderstood the situation. You have it backwards. The output may be history papers, but the goal is to create historians. The problem is users are becoming too dependent on chatbots and also overestimate what they can actually do. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, a little bit later, we might open up the phones, give you a chance to join the conversation. But let me just say, first of all, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Kathy Koch as well as Dr. Jeff Myers. And Jeff, let me come to you for just a minute, because obviously we'll be asking you questions about worldview. But early on, there were 7 causes for why this actually took place. And I think there are a lot of people that I found as I travel around and meet some of our donors, go to various radio stations, a lot of people, they ask this question: how did we get here? I mean, we never would have anticipated, say, 20 years ago that a young boy would think that he might be a girl, a young girl might think she's a boy, or certainly no one would have been talking about this idea of transgenderism. So how did this happen? Can you explain to us?
Kerby, it's a perfect storm of these 7 different factors, as you mentioned. The first one is just our human condition. We're sinful people. We are ignorant of what is God's best, and we sometimes make an idol out of ourselves. And so that positions us to be open and vulnerable to society's messages, even when they're wrong. The second thing is there was an intentional ideology that was developed at the university level, coming out of kind of a postmodern mindset of identity, which focuses on race and sexuality or national origin and so forth as core to your identity, rather than what it means to be human. And the gender ideologists said, well, look, we want to try to convince people that there's no such thing as truth. Everybody is their own truth. But there is this persistent thing about the 6,500 biological differences between males and females. And as long as people see that as important, they'll think of that as a truth. So we need to somehow figure out how to dispense of that. And many, many words were expended in this project, and you've read some of these books. They're baffling and overwhelming, but the people writing them have concluded that we're gonna change this. Anybody who focuses on gender, they're patriarchal. That's evil. It needs to be overthrown. And then from there, you have a manipulation of language, and then this all filtered down into public schools. And then mental health professionals picked this up, operating from a wrong worldview. The media exploded it, and then medical organizations and companies realized they can make a tremendous amount of profit off of it, and all of a sudden you have a huge mess on your hands.
For sure. You know, one of the things that both of you quote is Lisa Littman, and she was at Brown University, and we first talked about her when we had Abigail Schreier on the program talking about that book, Irreversible Damage. I was speaking at a men's retreat a while back, Kathy, and somebody who was at Brown University talked about how this woman was completely mistreated because she was saying, we see sort of this rapid onset gender dysphoria, and yet these young girls don't show any evidence of that. And so she was thinking a lot of that was social contagion. And even though she is a liberal, she said, I always voted for a Democrat, stop calling me a Christian rightist and all the things. They ruined her life there at Brown University because she was a liberal willing to speak the truth. And so it helps us understand, I think, Kathy, that this didn't happen by chance, did it?
No. It's such a good point, Kerby. And I think we write well about that. And I love what Jeff said earlier, that these people are not stupid. The people who have been consumed by the issue, the young people who have been, bought the lie, drank the Kool-Aid, if you will, that they're born in the wrong body. They're not stupid. They're deceived. And they've been manipulated. They've been lied to. They've been targeted. They've been chosen. by people who are on the LGBTQ liberal side of things to say, hey, there's one we can recruit to our side of the table, if you will. And it's just very, very sad.
Well, and again, part of the way in which they recruited them, because this now gets back to the parents, is they would say to the parent, do you want a child that transitions or do you want a dead child?
Right.
And that's a pretty powerful argument.
Oh, it's very powerful. And that in itself was a lie. We know that the suicide rate is actually highest 12 years after someone attempts to transition. And we say attempts to transition because they can't transition. A boy cannot become a girl and a girl cannot become a boy. But they make the attempt thinking that rather than dealing with mental health, rather than dealing with their depression, their anxiety, their isolation, their loneliness, and their confusion, they're thinking, oh, if I change my body, then everything will be fine. And that I can do. That actually feels simple to them, simpler than years of therapy to get rid of their anxiety, maybe. Yeah. Again, the liar has told them that. And so then it just becomes a much bigger mess. And so it's not that they kill themselves. And we've got to help parents understand that. To look back, in fact, we're sometimes asked on shows like yours, would there have been warning signs that parents could have paid attention to? And often there are.
Yeah, of course.
Where they change. They used to have a lot of friends over, now they don't. They used to help in the kitchen, now they don't. They used to want to go run errands with dad, now they don't. When they make changes, something's happened and they're unwilling to have conversations. And that is what we need to look for. So if we could intervene in that stage, then maybe they wouldn't buy the lie and they wouldn't be suicidal down the road later.
Jeff, I want to spend a little bit of time talking with Kathy about some of those core needs. But before we do, let's give some hope, because I'm getting the sense that some of this is turning around. Whereas before, you had all these major institutions promoting this. Now they're not. You have, of course, a recent court case that went in the opposite direction. And you're up there in Colorado, which is a little different than where we are today here in the state of Texas. But I'm noticing some things are changing. What are you noticing?
Several things are changing, Kerby. First of all, young adults have grown weary of this conversation. Whenever young adults get to the place where they feel like something is being shoved on them, and they don't feel like it's something that they're exploring for themselves, they become resistant. This has always been true for every young person, as far as I know, in history. And we've reached that peak point where students are saying, okay, enough obsessing about this, I'm ready to move on. The second thing is, the young adults who are confused about their gender identity when they are teenagers, as long as they don't go through a medical transition, and especially if they get some help related to maybe unresolved childhood trauma, they resolve to coherence with their biological sex by the time they are finished going through puberty. So they eventually move away from this. I think a third thing that has happened right now is the legal climate has begun to change. There were a lot of young people who, for reasons you and Kathy were discussing, were tricked into going through radical, unreversible surgeries, and are now actually won a court judgment. Well, that is a shot across the bow for all these companies that thought they would make billions of dollars off of gender-confused kids. Now they're realizing that they're going to get their pants sued off of them, and so they are starting to back away. And even the American Medical Association last week, Kerby,
there you go,
has come out and said, well, now we think that our policy, just to make clear, we don't advocate surgeries before age 18. That is, there's another term for this we don't use on Christian shows, but it has something to do with covering your rear end.
Yes.
And it is that is what that move is from the American Medical Association. They realize all of their propaganda has put all of the members of their association at risk for legal action, and now they are running for the hills.
Well, we certainly do need to focus on some of the solutions. So I thought Kathy had come to you for just a minute. And again, remind people that they can go to celebratekids.com. I'm also going to give Jeff's website in just a minute. But you have a whole section, of course, you have whole books on the subject of the 5 core needs. But if we are trying to help our kids and they're really having struggle with their identity, it comes back to those 5 core needs, doesn't it?
It does. Thanks for bringing that up. So the first of the needs is for security. We have a need for trustworthiness. We have a need to be trusted and to find people who we can trust. And without security, we won't know who we are. One of the reasons that we have the gender confusion is that our young people have been listening to way too many voices, and they're not good at discerning who's for them, who's against them, who is legitimately speaking truth, who's not manipulating me, etc. So security, who can I trust? And if parents and grandparents and educators and coaches and pastors want to be the ones that kids listen to, then you have to earn their trust with honesty, with asking to be forgiven, with teaching, not just telling and yelling, etc. So when our security is solid, then we have a greater chance for a complete, accurate, beautiful identity. Chosen, adopted, created in God's image, male or female, by God's design. We see him as intentional. We see that our identity in Christ is the most important identity. We actually write in this book, Kerby, that gender dysphoria is a subset of identity dysphoria.
Yes.
One of the reasons that we have so many kids confused about their identity or about their gender is that they don't know who they are in general. The culture's yelling at them for so many things. They're not launching well because they're actually complex. It's not that they don't know what to do. They don't know which thing to do of all the things they think they could do. So identity is a real issue. Yeah.
And let me take a break because we do have one of those mandatory breaks, and we've given 2 of the 5. And as a matter of fact, I would encourage people to get a copy of the book or any of your other books, because this idea of security and identity, we'll come back and talk about belonging, purpose, and competence. And then we'll get into, well, how does worldview help? Because, again, we've identified the problem, maybe some of the causes, but now we're talking about what can you do to help your children or your grandchildren with this issue of identity, and especially this issue of gender confusion. So again, I think you're going to benefit from this book, which is published by our friends at Summit Ministries. If you would like to know more, of course, we have a link to celebratekids.com. We also, of course, have a link to summit.org. Both of them are available on our website, and we'll be back right after this.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. That scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today as we talk about the book Raising Gender-Confident Kids, helping kids embrace their God-given design. Dr. Kathy Koch is with us, and Dr. Jeff Myers. It is published by our friends at Summit, about 160 pages, very readable, lots of diagrams, illustrations, and the rest. But Kathy, let me come back, because we talked about the core need of security, who can I trust, a core need of identity, who am I, but then on top of that are 3 other very important core needs.
Right. Thank you, Kerby. Right. Then we get to belonging, who wants me. So our identity, who am I, really controls our belonging, who wants me. If I know that I'm a band person, that I'm going to look for others who are interested in music and band. Kids who don't know who they are will not know who they want to belong to, so now they're more vulnerable to the gay and lesbian appeal, if you will, where they're going to attract these kind of lost and lonely and broken kids. So we have to guard their belonging. We have to make sure that they're not following the people they shouldn't be following, et cetera, et cetera. So security, identity, belonging, who wants me, leads to purpose. Why am I alive? We were all created on purpose, with purpose, for such a time as this. But if we don't know who we can trust, and we don't know who we are, and we don't know who to serve, then we don't know why we're alive. And when we don't know why we're alive, we might as well die. And that's a really heavy thought, and I don't want to boy, I hope I just didn't trigger somebody when I said that, but we've got to be really aware as the more mature adults, let's hope, that a lack of purpose comes from a lack of relationship and from a confused identity. We know that there are young people who think that if they change their body, they would find their purpose. If they change their body, they would have more friends. And so this is why this issue is so critical to get a hold of and wrap our minds around the truth of what's going on here. Now, Kerby, once I have purpose, why am I alive? Then I can develop competence. What do I do well? If I don't have purpose, why am I alive? I don't need to do anything well, and I don't even need to be well. My character is irrelevant. But when I know that I'm alive on purpose, for a purpose, with purpose, and I can leave the world a better place simply because God chose to make me me, then I'm motivated to find my competence. And when I have competence, everything changes. But you don't have it if you don't have the first four. And we start with security. So let's be trustworthy. Let's tell the truth. Let's show people that we're on their side. Let's make sure that we correct their false identity, give them truth, give them relational skills so that they're not lonely and isolated, develop their purpose with them by letting them serve, by knowing them really well, and then showing them their competence. It's rich the way that God's created you, and all things are now possible.
And again, let me just mention that's chapter 3. Mm-hmm. And if that came too quickly, that's why you need to get a copy of the book or get your whole book on that subject and what to do. But let me, if I can, maybe go to chapter 4 because it's talking about the importance of worldview. And Jeff, first of all, sometimes we have to set aside stereotypes because here's a good stereotype. Your daughter is a helicopter pilot, and that's not a place where you see a lot of men. I had a niece who was, I think, the only white female in the engineering class. So sometimes there is this stereotype that is being foisted upon our children and grandchildren. We need to reject that. And that really brings us back to this idea of worldview, doesn't it?
There's no question, Kerby. My daughter actually is a helicopter pilot. That wasn't just a random illustration that you gave there. And if she were growing up today, she would undoubtedly be told, well, if you're a girl in a 99% male-dominated field, you must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. I had a student who was an engineer. She was told the same thing by her classmates. Well, if you're going to be an engineer, you must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. All of those stereotypes come from a worldview, a false worldview, a counterfeit worldview that people haven't considered. So, and you and I talked about this on the show before. There are really 3 steps when you talk about analyzing something from a worldview perspective. The first is to take every thought captive.
Yes.
That you want to know what the truth is, understand the truth. The second one is don't be taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophies. That's Colossians 2:8. Mm-hmm. And then the third is to set the captives free. Learn how to talk about the truth so that other people can come to a truth. So the first thing we've got to understand is that God designed male and female. He designed us in creation, though that there are 2 kinds of human beings. Different races aren't different kinds of human beings. You've talked about this on your show a lot. That different nationalities, or those are not different kinds of human beings. There are only 2 kinds of human beings, males and females. That's the way God designed us, and we're designed to bear his image. So once we grasp that, then we can ask, well, what are the factors in the culture that are up against this? And the main lie, Kerby, that people have come to believe is that gender falls on a spectrum with extreme masculinity at one end and extreme femininity on the other end. Essentially, you have G.I. Joe on one side and Barbie on the other. And since none of us are G.I. Joe or Barbie, then we're all kind of in the middle. We are all non-binary. And all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, if I embrace that idea, which is not a biblical idea, it's actually a lie. There's no academic research proving that gender falls on a spectrum. There are males and there are females. And so once we recognize where that lie comes from and why we're so vulnerable to these stereotypes, then the third thing is to learn how to talk about it with other people. And that's one thing that Kathy and I do a lot in the book. In fact, in Raising Gender Confident Kids, we have 200 conversation starters. Here's how to say it. Somebody says to you, you got to use my pronouns. Here's how to respond. Mm-hmm. Somebody says, our church needs to have pronoun hospitality. Here's how to respond. You have a child who comes home and says, I think I was born in the wrong body. Here's what you can say, because the goal is to learn to talk about the truth. That's an essential part of knowing the truth.
What I think is so good is you have a whole section on how false worldviews and distortions affect them. I'm trapped in a wrong body. Gender falls on a spectrum, as you mentioned. My sexuality is my main identity. Gender is just a performance. So you're really giving some people what we might call talking points. And that's kind of really key to all of this. And also one of the other things in worldview is you talk about how a worldview brings clarity, brings confidence. We were just talking about that a minute ago with Kathy about that, how it even meets some of your core needs. So a worldview is more than just academic. It is really who you are, how you think, and how you act, isn't it?
That's correct. And then when it comes to gender, Kerby and Kathy and I emphasize this throughout the book, gender isn't something you have to become. It's something that God designed you with. Now, if you feel uncomfortable in your body when you're going through puberty, well, welcome to humanity. Every single person who's ever lived felt uncomfortable in their body when they were moving from being a boy into being a man, or from being a girl into being a woman. And if we learn to walk alongside of young adults and say, you're not crazy, you're not alone, you're going to be okay, I'm going to walk alongside of you. Yes, this is confusing. Yes, you can get through it. I had a student this last summer who came to Summit and said, to admit, I have just for the longest time thought that I am a girl trapped in a boy's body. Can you help me? And our team, came around him, didn't judge him for that, just loved him, and he came to realize he had body dysmorphia. He had never liked the way his body looked up against the ones he identified as being very masculine. And so he thought, maybe I'm in the wrong body. He was set free from that, Kerby, because people didn't try to ignore it, didn't try to just overlook it, didn't say you're just fine the way you are, but walked alongside of him to find out what it means to be an amazing image bearer of God.
I want to add something, Jeff, to what you've been talking about so well, and that is that we encourage our readers to know the truth and to be set free from the truth, and to not always bring it up, though. Like some of our listeners today, Kerby, are thinking, but I can't talk to my grandchild about God.
Yes.
Or my son isn't open to the Bible. We understand that, but we need to be open to the Bible, and we need to parent, grandparent, and teach from the perspective that God's ways are best and God's will is best and his truth is the truth that really matters, because that empowers the parent and the grandparent and the other people to have the confidence that they need in order to speak the truth boldly. You don't have to always use scripture, but you can still teach truth. I think that's a really beautiful thing for people to maybe wrap their mind around.
Let's we can take a break, and when we come back, let's get into what we can do for the boys, what we can do for the girls. These are whole chapters in that book. And if you find yourself saying, well, this is going too fast, you're covering a lot of material. Yes, we are. But again, that's why we encourage you maybe to get a copy of the book. First of all, again, we do have a link to celebratekids.com. Great place to find out more about Kathy. You could even book her to come and speak on this issue if you would like to do so. There's some online courses. She has a podcast, which I would highly recommend to you. And so that's the first one. Of course, we also have Summit Ministries. This is some place where you may want to send young people as they are headed off to college to really help them embrace God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. And that's, again, summit.org. There are conferences and information there, all sorts of books. Of course, I've mentioned a few of the books already. I've got sitting on the table here, 8 Great Smarts by Kathy Koch, as well as Truth Changes Everything by Jeff Myers, and all sorts of other resources you're going to want to know about as well. I might also mention that one of the things we've made available in the basket here at Point of View is a little book that I'll hold up, just a biblical point of view on transgenderism. Next time we update it, we will, of course, put Raising Gender-Confident Kids in the for suggested reading as well, because this is just another resource that we make available here at Point of View, because this issue of transgenderism, gender confusion is really important. We'll come back and talk about what can we do for the boys, what can we do for the girls. We would certainly have a lot more of time to cover it, but we'll take a break and be back as quickly as we can right after this.
You're listening to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
Raising gender-confident kids. Dr. Kathy Koch with us, as well as Dr. Jeff Myers. And Jeff mentioned something in passing. If you go through this book, there's little black half circles, and those are conversation starters. So sometimes you say, well, I don't know what to say. Well, the questions are very easy to find and some of the possible answers. But real quickly, you have, of course, one chapter on guiding boys to become confident men by using their core needs, and then guiding girls to become confident women by using the 8 smarts. And so for just a minute, can you kind of give us an overview? Each one of the chapters deserves a whole segment, but we only have so much time.
Yeah. Let me do an overview of the girls, and then Jeff can jump in for a minute on the guys. So we are concerned about stereotypes, as you already mentioned, Kerby. So one of the things that we can do is help girls identify how they have been created to be smart by God's choice, and then how to walk in that in a really healthy way. So it's possible for girls to be body smart and to want to climb trees and to want to kick balls, and they might not want to play with dolls. It doesn't mean that they were born in the wrong body and that they're broken. It just has something to do with the way that they've been created. It's possible that girls can be nature smart and would love to spend a lot of time outside, and it's possible that girls, like Jeff's daughter, can be logic smart and want to be able to take engines apart and figure out how they work. So we write a whole chapter about, denying the stereotypical belief and really knowing your kids. Do you delight in how your children have been created? Do they know that you delight in that? And have you identified who they are and why they are who they are? That's identity. We think that people are camping on gender because they don't know who they are, and they know their gender, or they know what they think about their gender. So the more that we talk about the whole of who they are, the greater the likelihood that gender becomes a less of an issue. So that's the point of that chapter. Jeff, explain to our audience what you did with that boy chapter.
This is one of my favorite chapters. Well, Kathy, you already described the core needs, and we just took each one of those core needs and tied it to something that boys are motivated to do. For example, boys want security. Who can I trust? And the answer to that is to find people who are sages and to become a sage, to be a person who seeks wisdom. On identity, people are asking, who am I? Boys were designed to explore. Our whole education system is designed to keep boys in their seats and to deny them recess if they are disobedient in class. The girls benefit from recess for sure, but boys need it. And they need to get out there and explore and take chances, not in spite of the risks, but because of the risks. And then the belonging question, who wants me? We help boys focus on what it means to serve others. I would tell my sons, when you leave the house each day, find somebody that has a need and figure out how to meet it. Go figure out what's going on around you and how you can help. Boys find purpose in that. And then the question of purpose, why am I alive? Well, boys were designed to be warriors. They were designed to stand for truth and to fight against evil and injustice. And the more they have the opportunity to do that, the more alive they become as boys. And then finally is competence. What do I do well? Now, there's this old term, husbandman. And if you study animals, you'll probably study in a program called animal husbandry. It's how to help animals thrive. And guys were designed by God to bring maturity to the things and to the people in their realm to help those around them do better and to thrive. When you take all those things and put them together, and I know we're through all of this, you realize, well, wow, so boyhood and girlhood, these were things God actually designed. And this is the best part to me of all of this. After we did the chapters on boys and girls, we did a whole chapter on how God designed boys and girls to harmonize with one another for the good of the world.
Well, that was my next question for Kathy. Before I might mention also there's an FAQ section, but Kathy, maybe wind us down here, because guiding boys and girls, men and women, to harmonize, because we do need each other.
We do. One of the things that concerns me are the girls I've spoken to who they don't like their gender, and they assume that the boy gender is better and that they'll be better off being boys. So we want people to respect their gender that God chose for them, and the other gender, to respect it, not lust after it or not desire it for themselves, but to respect it. And Jeff taught me a lot about how we are very, very different. We respond to stress differently. Women might want to just think about it, and guys want to go act on it. Yeah. Well, if you act when you're stressed but you don't think, there's danger. Yeah. And if you only think but you don't act, there's danger. So we need each other, and we can teach this to girls and boys so that they understand that they're different isn't bad. The different isn't bad. The different is just different. And this is why we, again, harmonize. I think that chapter is so important.
I think so too. And again, the FAQ at the end is great because all these frequently asked questions, it goes on for quite a number. So you find yourself, maybe our child comes home from school and says, I think I'm in the wrong gender. Well, there's 24 different straightforward answers to the 24 most frequently asked questions. So that's really helpful. But just before we run out of time, I wanted to do two things. First of all, Jeff, certainly every time we've had you on the program, we've talked about Summit. And I, of course, already mentioned that you've had a legacy here because one of the people working at Point of View actually went to Summit and finished there. But as people go to summit.org, they can certainly find out about this book, but they can also find out about the various conferences and all the various resources. Can you talk about what is available to some of our listeners?
I'd love to. Summit Ministries, since its founding, has had the privilege of training 1.4 million young leaders to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. And we're now looking at 93% of our students who've graduated from the program in long-term studies who still say they still stay strong to a biblical worldview. So it's a complete reversal of what often happens, which is young adults finish high school and then walk away from their faith commitment. So in the program, 12 days long in Colorado or in South Carolina, students come. We bring in the top Christian thought leaders of our day, people who have a great story, who know how to communicate with young people, and who will help them understand biblical truth. And then through the course of that and lots of adventure and fun together, we form into a community of people who want to stand for God's truth. That program has a profound impact on young adults, especially as they're preparing to leave high school and either go into a field of study or into a career. And that, I believe, is going to be, they're the future leaders. If you are thinking, yes, that program sounds good, I hate to sound like a salesman here, but the truth is we're almost 3/4 full for this coming summer. So those seats are going very fast. You want to take a look at summit.org and arrange for your 16 to 22-year-old to join us for an epic, life-changing program for 2 weeks this summer.
As you know, we have a link to that. Of course, if you type in Jeff Myers, you will be able to see all the other interviews we did. Most recent one, Truth Changes Everything. Kathy, let's go to celebratekids.com. First of all, there's this podcast, which I really encourage people to listen to. There's the blog. You have online courses, as well as, of course, your books. And some people can even come and have you come and speak in their particular group.
That would be amazing. Sure. Yeah. I travel the nation. I love to speak to kids of all ages and teachers, grandparents, parents, and we do pro-life work as well. We just want to help people celebrate kids the way Jesus did and still does. So we do that through speaking, podcasting, writing books, doing the blogs, answering questions. We're just so privileged that God lets us do what we do. So if people want to follow through, that would be great. Yeah, our podcast, Facing the Dark, I think it's a good podcast. People have been really pleased with it, so maybe people could check it out.
I would think they would. And again, you just were in Lynchburg last week, and you are here today. So thanks for driving over, coming in studio. And could you do any better than this, having two of our favorite guests on the same program together? So, Jeff, thank you for being with us. Kathy, thank you as well. And again, if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know more about this book, Raising Gender Confident Kids, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. You can find the links to all the websites, as well as the opportunity to maybe consider getting a book, maybe scheduling a speaker, maybe even going to a conference. All available at the website, pointofview.net. And you've been listening to Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kerby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, let's see if we can get back to some of the issues in the news. But of course, yesterday was the Super Bowl. And of course, you have, I think a few of you might have an opinion about the halftime celebration, if you will call it that, or the alternative, which was produced by Turning Point USA. So I thought we'd mention that for a few minutes, but I'll also open up the phones. Maybe you have some comments or questions about that. And then I wanted to get into the issue of sports gambling for this very good reason. Of all people, Bill Maher, and we quote him from time to time. Matter of fact, I've posted an article about him, and I've also have in front of me the transcript of what he said, because on Friday, on, of course, his program, he spent a fairly significant amount of time at the end talking about sports gambling and raising the same kind of questions that we have raised. So I thought it would be appropriate to, first of all, mention that we have addressed this issue. Number two, I'll hold up the booklet that I have on gambling, which we would be glad to send to you. But of course, you can simply go to the website right now, pointofview.net, and get a copy of the booklet on a biblical view on gambling. So I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But let's, of course, mention the fact that, first of all, the Seattle team won, and rather convincingly, although at the end you might not have noticed that, but when you're ahead 9-0 at the half, I think most people would say, I think the Seattle the Hawks certainly have been able to do fairly significantly against the New England Patriots. So again, the idea that defense is not as important in the Super Bowl, I think it was pretty important this time. But I suspect most of you might have some comments about the halftime show. First of all, let's recognize why this was done. There have been a lot of people asking for some time, why is it that Roger Goodell, the head of, again, the NFL, decided to pick an individual by the name of Bad Bunny. And, of course, his real name is Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio. But nevertheless, there are some very good reasons why. And that is, if you are the NFL and you're trying to attract more of an audience, you pretty much can assume that you've got most individuals who have already decided they're going to watch the Super Bowl that like football. But if you look outside of this country, not so many people watch what we call football. Matter of fact, they watch something they call football, which is soccer. Or they may watch basketball, but they don't watch football, which is one of the reasons why, I'll just use our local team here, the Dallas Cowboys, almost every year have gone to Mexico. This next year, they're going to Brazil in an attempt to try to get more people to watch, more people to get involved in what is American football. Now, this is a strategy that's been used before. Budweiser says, we've got only kind of working class redneck kind of guys drinking light beer, so we'll just see if we can maybe use some transgender ideas, like we talked about last hour, to promote Bud Light. Or you have maybe something like the Cracker Barrel. Well, we already have a clientele that goes to Cracker Barrel, so let's change some things up so we can get more people to come. Well, you kind of see how that worked in both cases, and I suspect it's going to work a little bit with the NFL as well. We want to attract people who aren't necessarily likely to watch football, and if you use that mindset, I want to, for a minute, don't necessarily agree with it, but I want to explain to you why they chose that. Mr. Bunny, we'll refer to him for just a few minutes, has 19 videos on YouTube, more than 1 billion views. Okay, more than any other artist on the platform. You may not know who he is, but a lot of people do, especially in other countries around the world. Let's look at it a different way. His YouTube channel has 51 million subscribers. You say, well, how do I rate that? Okay, let's take Beyonce, has 28 million. Oh, that's not so much. In just a minute, we'll talk about the All-American Halftime show, which was put on by Turning Point USA. Kid Rock, had to mention Kid Rock at least once. He has 2 million subscribers, okay? Nicki Minaj, 28 million. She's now a Trump fan. You get the idea. There's no close second to Mr. Bunny. And so if you're trying to attract more people to watch the Super Bowl, attract more people to get interested in American football, you can understand that. On the negative side, and I suspect as now we open up the phones, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, you know the rest of the story. First of all in Spanish. Nothing wrong with that. We've had other entertainers actually sing in Spanish, but then in a presentation on the middle yard lines there, the 50-yard line and others, look of sugar cane plantations, Hispanics working there, maybe trying to foist a little bit of white guilt, trying to make it much more Hispanic. But also, we won't even talk about all the gyrations. You know what I'm going to get into in that regard. The pushback has been substantial. And since I did mention the Turning Point USA, that obviously was not going to even come close to the number of people that would be still watching the Super Bowl halftime. But nevertheless, let's give credit where credit is due, because this was an attempt to provide an alternative. And maybe we now have a tradition where there will be an alternative. In that particular case, the stream on YouTube, I think it reached a high of about 6 million viewers. Again, since lots of times people watching it are part of a family, so you can then sometimes get even higher numbers. At one point, they said that there was a peak one time of 6.15 million, something like that. And if you assume maybe 2.5 a household, that's a pretty significant alternative. But of course, it didn't cause any significant dip in the halftime celebration there yesterday. But I think, if nothing else, wanted you to at least understand why was this a decision made by NFL? I think it was a bad decision. I think it's one more reason why some people say when the halftime show comes on, I'm going to tune it out, or I'm going to turn it off, or I'm going to leave it on, but I'm going to mute it. Or in some cases, we saw some actually decided to go to the All-American Halftime Show, which was put together by Turning Point USA. I think that may be a trend in the future. When we come back real quickly, did want to say just a little bit about this issue of sports gambling, because lo and behold, Bill Maher, who is a liberal, an atheist, certainly an individual I did not expect when he was finishing his program to go into quite a monologue on his HBO show about the real dangers of sports gambling, an illustration as to why we've made this booklet available to you. And of course, we could send you a printed copy, but if you go to the website right now, you can certainly get a copy of A Biblical View on Gambling. And when we come back from the break, I'll explain to you why we have written about this and why Bill Maher talked about it on his program on Friday. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Clay Shirky, writing in the Yale Alumni Magazine, reminds us of the benefits and limitations of chatbots. He begins with a thought experiment. Imagine you were sitting around a Thanksgiving table on 2022, and a guest asked the table when AI would get to 1 million users. Some might say 2 years away, others might say 10 years away. The answer is a week from Monday. OpenAI dropped ChatGPT 3.5 on the last day of November. It had 1 million users by December 5th. This illustrates how fast AI have become part of our lives. To use ChatGPT, all you need to do is talk. But he says it's almost impossible to resist treating software that talks as something that also thinks. And because it has sophisticated language skills, it is easy to see why users depend on it and tend to overestimate the range and depths of its skills. One good example is the statement, an AI can pass the LSAT. While that may be true, it is not true that an AI can be a lawyer. He asked one of his lawyer colleagues about the LSAT story. The lawyer replied, I cannot convey to you how little my day is like answering a question on the LSAT. He says that if you see a factory making tires, you conclude that the worker's effort is to create tires. However, that is not true for a history class. If you conclude that the output is history papers and students are there to create papers, you have just misunderstood the situation. You have it backwards. The output may be history papers, but the goal is to create historians. The problem is users are becoming too dependent on chatbots and also overestimate what they can actually do. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Thought I'd get to sports gambling for just a minute, if for no other reason than, of course, there was a lot of money bet last night and days before on the Super Bowl. But more importantly, I'm always amazed how many times I will watch a clip of maybe something that Bill Maher has said and say, for an individual who's a liberal, an atheist, and certainly not looking at issues from a biblical point of view, how many times I think he gets it right. Now, part of that has to do with the fact of what we call common grace. If you have any amount of common sense, and I think the Bible is full of common sense, you wouldn't be surprised that sometimes an individual that is willing to maybe step back, think through some issues, use some critical thinking skills, would come to some of the same conclusions as an individual who is using biblical principles. But let's give him credit, because Bill Maher actually starts out by talking about the fact that we are calling it Super Bowl Sunday, but he says we might as well just call it Super Bet Sunday. Half of the men under the age of 50 now have an active online sports betting account. Now, he goes on to say, look, gambling all ruins lives, but he says, you've got your choice. He's libertarian, and again, if you're going to gamble, fine. But we want you, in this booklet and some of the resources we have, understand the consequences of that. But he says tonight, just for the information's sake, he said, I'd like to take you through how much things have changed with gambling in America. He says, when I was 20, there was literally just one place that you could gamble, Nevada. And of course, Las Vegas. And of course, he talked about what happens in Nevada supposedly stays in Nevada, but not really, because it began to expand. If you think about this, gambling was something which was not allowed. He talks about the Puritans, all that. I'll skip that in just a minute. But simply say that if you think about this, gambling was not legal in America for almost 300 years. And then in 1931, gambling in Nevada was legalized. He then tells the story, interestingly enough, of the hit musical Guys and Dolls, in which he shows a picture of Marlon Brando, who played Sky Masterson, who was a degenerate who would bet on just about anything, whether a fly would land on this sugar cube or another sugar cube, whether Lindy's would sell more cake, cheesecake or strudel, whatever it might be. He says, that's crazy, right? No, that's Polymarket. Now you can bet on who wins the Oscars, how a trial outcome might be, when we're going to bomb Iran, what color of Gatorade is used, all these kinds of things. And so again, no gambling for 300 years, then gambling in one area for about a half century until Atlantic City. Now you had gambling in Atlantic City and in Las Vegas. But again, this was relatively rare. But then 1964, New Hampshire became the first state where politicians figured out they could raise taxes by having a state lottery, which I suppose it goes for education. He says, which is especially funny since it's mostly played by people who think 99.999% chance of losing. I like those odds. And then 1971, you have off-track betting. And then, of course, we said, well, we should let Indians be able to have casinos, and then eventually we even have gambling on riverboats because they're out there in the water, so they're not necessarily governed by either state, but of course they never leave the dock. And you've seen that as well. And as bad as all of that gambling was, then you have 2018. That's when the Supreme Court struck down the federal ban on sports betting. And now, of course, you have gambling so tied to sports. I remember the first time I was on the broadcasting program, and we were debating back then, before we had sports gambling, because this was just done privately. But now, as he says, we have teams in Las Vegas. We have teams that used to ban gamblers. Now, Caesars Sportsbook is the official partner of New England, or the New York Bets, which he says is crazy. Who would bet on the bets? But nevertheless, he says there is just a lot of problem with gambling, but one of those is gambling isn't just bad because you lose the rent. Gambling is bad because it gives you permission to stop believing that you can control your destiny. At that point, he probably got a few people that are from Eastern cultures upset because he says, that's not how we think about in the West. That's Eastern culture. He says, I'm not putting it down, but it's more fatalistic in the Middle East. The idea that you have to just cast your fate to fate. You have to cast your fate to chance. That's why he says Macau does 3 times the gambling business that Las Vegas does. And so as a result, he spent a fair amount of time talking about some of the dangers of sports gambling. And I might just mention that our first article here is just one that appeared. Bill Maher laments rise of gambling culture among young Americans during, of course, his Real Time on HBO. And it's one of the reasons why, at least one more time, I thought I'd talk about the subject of gambling, simply because there was a lot of money wagered yesterday, and one of the things you're starting to see, those who speak to the issue of some of the kinds of pathologies of young men are pointing out that probably the greatest threat to young men is pornography. But maybe the second greatest threat is sports gambling. And quoting again Bill Maher, half of the men under the age of 50 now have an active online sports betting account. Something to think about, something that very few people are addressing. And I want to give 3 cheers to Bill Maher for addressing it, because we've addressed it as well here on Point of View. Before we take a break, let's see if we can get into a couple of other issues. And I wanted to give credit to the House Speaker, Mike Johnson. The other day, he was confronted by the fact that the Pope had quoted Matthew 25 as a justification for, indeed, why you should not have borders and you should not have deportation. Well, again, as you might imagine, we have a booklet coming out. As a matter of fact, very soon, if you open up your mailbox and you're one of our Truth Team members, you will see my booklet on a biblical view on borders and deportation. And I've posted this very good piece where Joshua Arnold points out that after getting that question, I watched the interview, and the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who's been on the program with us before, said, I think what I'll do is come home and maybe on X I'll post some of my my articles and my arguments for why we should have a border. And he quotes, of course, some of the verses that we quote in Acts 17, verse 26, in which it talks about the fact that God has set boundaries for lands of nations. That reads, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place. So he quotes that. He also quotes Deuteronomy 31, which we've talked about as well, in terms of having certain laws and regulations. In my booklet, I also quote from, of course, Exodus 23. I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, from the wilderness to the Euphrates. You also have in Deuteronomy 19, you shall not move your neighbor's landmark, which men of old have set. Proverbs 23, do not move an ancient landmark or enter the field of the fatherless. And so, if nothing else, I want to give credit to Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, for taking us through some of those verses, and then, of course, acknowledging that we certainly require that people obey government. That's Romans 13. And certainly it is important for individuals to, if they were to come into the nation of Israel, enter into a covenant with God. So in some respects, when people wrench Deuteronomy 31 out of context, they have to recognize we don't require that you become a Christian when you come to the United States. So that verse probably needs to be updated to how it applies in 21st century America. And at the same time, let's also acknowledge that we are to have compassion for aliens and immigrants. And if a person were to disagree with how deportation is taking place, well, we're starting to change the way we're going to be doing some of that in the future, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But again, these principles, I think, apply. And if nothing else, I wanted you to read this very lengthy, it goes on for 5 pages, summary of some of the things that the Speaker of the House did to address this from a biblical point of view. And if you find yourself finding that helpful and maybe wanting to get a copy of our booklet on borders and deportation, that's one of the very good reasons and justifications why I would encourage you to sign up to be a Truth Team member, because you'll be receiving those on a regular basis. Let's take a break, though. We have more to cover right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places, and some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, one of the other articles I wanted you to have access to, in addition to this very good piece that is a great summary of what the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, wrote by Joshua Arnold, is this piece that was collected by John Brown with the Christian Post. And it actually talks about 6 very leading Democrats what they have said in the past about illegal immigration and deportation, because it illustrates how something has changed dramatically. And the best illustration I can give to that is, for many years, people like Bernie Sanders were speaking out against illegal immigration because the impact that illegal immigration was having on suppressing the wages of blue-collar workers. And somehow somebody didn't get the memo to him when he continued to speak out against that. And Democrats are saying, no, wait a minute, we shouldn't be saying that anymore, because they'd been saying that for years. And eventually he kind of changed his tune. But it illustrates, I think, only so well this piece by John Brown. 6 times top Democrats warned against illegal immigration. And this wasn't all so long ago. Now, the first one was longer ago, and that was by Bill Clinton. But here's what Bill Clinton has said. Matter of fact, some of this was from his State of the Union address. Quote, all Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large number of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use imposes burden on our taxpayers. That's what he said at the time. Absolutely true. He went on to say, that's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders, more by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens. This again, President of the United States, Bill Clinton, and Democrat during the 1990s. One more point. He said, we are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to prevent the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years. We must do more to stop it, he added. And that, of course, prompted a standing ovation from members of both political parties. So that's what Bill Clinton said. Let's go to Hillary Clinton, because now that brings us to the 2008 presidential campaign. And again, these are some of the things that she said. Quote, I think we've got to have tough conditions. Tell people to come out of the shadows, she said. This was in a rally. She went on to say, if they've committed a crime, deport them. No questions asked. They're gone. That's Hillary Clinton saying that not so long ago. She went on to suggest that illegal immigrants who are law-abiding and employed should be given conditions and penalties if they want to stay in the United States. And here's what she said, quote, you have to pay a stiff fine because you came here illegally. You have to pay back taxes. You have to try to learn English. You have to wait in line. And again, that got a very thunderous applause from her audience, which was an audience primarily of Democrats, since at the time she was running against, of course, Barack Obama. Which brings me to number 3, Barack Obama. And this, again, some of the statements he made as a U.S. Senator, and then we'll give you a few when he was president. But first of all, some of this is in his book. You can check it out, The Audacity of Hope, okay? That was published in 2006. He said, quote, the number of immigrants added to the labor force every year is of a magnitude not seen in this country over a century. He goes on to say in The Audacity of Hope, if this huge influx of most low-skill workers provides some benefits to the economy as a whole, especially by keeping our workforce young, in contrast to the increasingly geriatric Europe and Japan, it also threatens to depress further the wages of blue-collar Americans, remember that phrase, and put strains on an already overburdened safety net. That's what he wrote as senator. That's in his book. And again, you can check the quotes out for yourself, but we've posted this article so you can find it. Okay, later on, of course, then he becomes president. As a matter of fact, he was engaged in so much deportation, more so far than even the Trump administration has engaged in, although I think over time that will exceed that most likely. But at the time, even some liberal activists were referring to Barack Obama, although they liked his liberal ideas, they didn't like his deportation deportation and even called him for a while the deporter-in-chief. But nevertheless, here's one more comment from a speech by Barack Obama. What I'm describing is accountability, a common sense middle ground approach. If you meet the criteria, you can come out of the shadows and get right with the law. This was this idea of amnesty. But if you're a criminal, you'll be deported. Again, as Hillary Clinton said a minute ago, as I quoted, no questions asked. If you're a criminal, you come out of the shadows, you're gone. You'll be deported. If you plan to enter the U.S. illegally, your chances of getting caught and sent back just went up. Why? Because he increased the number at the border. These are individuals that were Democratic leaders. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. Let's take a few more. Number 4, Chuck Schumer. Senate minority leader now, but he's been in Congress for 45 years. Here's a speech he gave at Georgetown University Law Center in which he referred to illegal immigration as wrong. Quote, "Let me elaborate. The first of these 7 principles is that illegal immigration is wrong, plain and simple. Until the American people are convinced that we will stop future flows of illegal immigration, we will make no progress on dealing with the millions of illegal immigrants who are here now or on rationalizing our system of legal immigration. That's plain and simple and unavoidable." You can go on, but I think you can get the idea that we are dealing with virtually every individual speaking to this issue. Well, let's go to number 5, Nancy Pelosi. Again, she was the House Minority Leader in 2013, but at one point was the Speaker of the House. But again, when there was a question of individuals that were certainly questioning the pace of deportations, this is what Representative Nancy Pelosi said, quote, "Our view of the law is if somebody is here without sufficient documentation, that it is not a reason for deportation. If someone has broken the law or committed a felony or something, that is a different story." This is the interview she did with Telemundo. She went on to say, "When most people are apprehended, they're deported. I don't see any reason for these deportations." So again, you can see that she had some questions about the fact that the Obama administration might have been deporting people a little too quickly for what she felt was appropriate. But at the same time, a speech the next year, she did express support for President Obama's executive actions aimed at what? Securing our borders, deporting felonies, not families, requiring undocumented immigrants to pass a criminal background check and pay taxes. These were, again, the statements she made. One last one. Joe Biden. In this case, he was not only upset about illegal immigration, he was upset about employers that hire them. And so he said, quote, "In fact, the person we should send to jail is not the illegals. We should send to jail the employers." He went on to say, "If you knowingly hire an illegal alien, then you should be held accountable because let me tell you, the next person I hear tell me that my labor guys aren't willing to work hard, that's why you have illegals putting up sheetrock, then I want to tell you, you don't know my guys." So again, you can see that the whole argument is being made by 6 different Democratic leaders. Each one of them had concerns about illegal immigration, even as we got into the 21st century very quickly, and as a result, even as we got into the last decade or so. So only thing has changed is when the memo started going out saying, maybe we just need to turn a blind eye because these might be the next voters for the Democratic leadership. And all the times we used to talk about the dangers of illegal immigration, hopefully people won't take the time to dig up those quotes. But we did. And they're on the website, and you can read them for yourself. This particular set of quotes goes on for 5 pages. It's well documented, and if you would like to use them in a Facebook post or a X post or maybe on TikTok or something else, or maybe even read some of those quotes at a town hall meeting with a member of Congress, they're available to you on the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention as a program note that tomorrow we're going to have Jonathan Tepper with us. Has a book called Shooting Up. An incredible story, by the way, growing up, if you will, in the slums with missionary parents, surrounded by drug abuse and the issue of AIDS and a variety of others, and talking about Christian outreach. Individual later ended up going to Oxford, Rhodes Scholar, incredible story, and we will spend some time talking with him about just the need for us to always be reaching out to those who are maybe the forgotten individuals in our community. And of course, as we've been talking about immigration, that certainly is relevant as well. We've had people on this program talking about the outreach to those who have come here legally, those who have come here seeking asylum, and the rest. That is one part of the equation, but the other part of that I think is helpful as well, which is why I wanted you to take advantage of the fact that we've posted this very good summary of the piece that was put together by the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, on a biblical defense of borders. Of course, you might also want to get, as soon as it's available, my booklet on borders and deportation from a biblical point of view. Also, I think it'd be helpful for many of you if you would want to get the piece that we've posted as well by John Brown, 6 times top Democrats warned against illegal immigration and called for deportation. Puts a lot of that in context. My Viewpoints commentary, by the way, is called Chatbots, and it reminds you of another topic, which we might get into a little bit more later in the week. Will AI actually take away your job? Well, it's going to affect some people very significantly, so we'll talk about that later in the week, but I just wanted to let you know that that piece is available. And, of course, we have a banner there in which you can get a copy of my booklet on a biblical view on gambling. But I wanted to end with this piece by our good friend Jerry Newcomb, which we may talk about sometime when we have him on the program. It is, I think, creatively titled, No Sanctuary in the Sanctuary. Now, first of all, Minnesota is a sanctuary state. Minneapolis, St. Paul's sanctuary city, but there was no sanctuary in the sanctuary of City's Church in St. Paul. And it's a reminder of what we may be facing in the future. Now, after selecting this, it also was, I think, fortuitous, or maybe God's design, that I was sitting in a meeting yesterday in which an individual came in who actually used to work with the Secret Service and talked about what it takes to protect a president, a vice president, former candidates, various members of Congress, sometimes certainly cabinet officers. And he's taken that now and applied it to a church. And it's been interesting because we can't necessarily assume that the church is the sanctuary it used to be. And of course, what Jerry Newcomb is talking about is when you had all sorts of individuals, agitators, 30 to 40 agitators entering into the city's church in St. Paul. Also, you had Don Lemon, former CNN anchor who was videotaping it and has now been rearrested. And he points out that the scene was chaotic. He says an affidavit filed on behalf of the victims said these agitators entered the church in the morning of January 18th and intimidated, harassed, and oppressed and terrorized parishioners, including children. One woman fell and got hurt, according to the court document, while other protesters physically blocked people from leaving the church and the parking lot. Also, I might just add, physically prevented them from getting to their children. If you receive Gary Bauer's end-of-day report, the Tuesday edition talks about how in some of the cases there were these agitators terrifying the children shouting, "Do you know your parents are Nazis? They're going to burn in hell." This is what the agitators were saying. If the worshipers attempted to walk away, the protesters pursued them and continued to scream in the face of their children. There's more, but you can read all about it in the piece that Gary Bowers put together. And interestingly enough, as we see in the affidavit that came out here, one of the reasons the agitators came to this particular church was because one of the assistant pastors appears to be a member of ICE. And so they're yelling things like, "This ain't God's house. This is the house of the devil," and all the rest. Okay. Now, you're dealing with some of the ringleaders who've been arrested now. And there have been, I think, at the when he wrote this, Jerry wrote this just a day ago. I think 9 have been arrested. But Jerry Newcomb also has a radio program. And so on his radio program, he brought on Troy Miller, who is the president of the National Religious Broadcasters. We had Troy Miller on the other day. And again, Troy Miller, president of NRB, said the whole scene was about intimidation. They weren't just being obnoxious. They were literally yelling at the parishioners. And so he was grateful that the Justice Department has acted quickly. But I thought it might be, just since we so often are talking about America in the celebration of 250 years, go back in history a little bit. And this comes from our good friend Bill Federer. We need to get him on again probably to talk about this, but he points out, interestingly enough, that there was a time when Baptists in Virginia had their services disrupted. One of the reasons James Madison introduced a bill to the Virginia legislature, and that was in 1785, the bill was, quote, "for punishing disturbers of religious worship," and it then passed in 1789. And the bill punished by imprisonment those who were convicted shall of purpose maliciously and contemptuously disquiet or disturb any congregation assembled in any church. So back in the 18th century, there were times in which there were individuals who were being disturbed. And, of course, later on, James Madison not only introduced the, of course, bill into the Virginia legislature, but if you get my booklet we just produced recently on the Bill of Rights, you recognize that he also, of course, introduced a series of protections that were added to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, the top 10. And, of course, one of those was this idea that men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion. That's what he wrote in terms of the Virginia Bill of Rights, which later was modified into what today we call the First Amendment, which simply says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of people to peaceably to assemble or to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So this piece reminds us that we're dealing with sometimes the fact that the sanctuary isn't always a sanctuary. And maybe I could bring that former Secret Service agent here, or some of the other people that have been involved in what they call sheepdog protectors, because as we well know, sometimes it has been a very horrific scene when people bring guns into those church sanctuaries, and the need for us to all provide as much protection as we can for people who gather in God's place in a worship center to worship God, to be protected from some of this. So, Jerry Newcomb, 3 cheers for your No Sanctuary in the Sanctuary. It is a 4-page piece, which he spends some time not only talking about what has just happened, but even taking us back to what has happened even back in previous centuries. Fascinating. And again, one of the other articles we've posted for you on the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know more about the book by Kathy Cook and Jeff Myers, it's available on the website. I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.